Hello friends. About of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed. And I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. It all started with a news bulletin that flashed across my phone screen like a goddamn emergency alert. All national parks closed indefinitely. I almost choked on my coffee. I mean, seriously? What in the actual hell? I'm a park ranger at Yellowstone, and this was beyond anything I'd ever seen. Sure, we'd had closures before, forest fires, bear activity, the occasional government shutdown. But this was different. This felt ominous. The news channels were going nuts, of course. Experts were spouting theories left and right, but nobody seemed to have a clue what was really going on. Some were saying it was some kind of environmental disaster. Others were whispering about terrorist threats. Hell, I even heard some crazy conspiracy theorist on the radio ranting about aliens. But the official statement from the government? Vague as hell. Unforeseen circumstances. Public safety concerns. Yeah, right. Like that told us anything. The park was buzzing with confusion and anxiety. Tourists were scrambling to pack up their tents and RVs. Families were cutting their vacations short, and even the wildlife seemed to be on edge. The usually calm bison were restless. The elk were spooked, and the wolves were howling like they'd seen a ghost. My boss, a grizzled old veteran named Frank, called us rangers in for an emergency meeting. He looked as pale as I'd ever seen him, and his voice was shaky as he read the official statement from the higher-ups. Effective immediately. All park personnel are to assist in the evacuation of visitors. No exceptions. What about us, Frank? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What happens after everyone's gone? He looked at me with a grim expression. We stay, skeleton crew. Just enough to keep an eye on things. Keep an eye on what? Someone else chimed in. What the hell are we supposed to be looking for? Frank just shook his head. I don't know, son. But whatever it is, it's bad enough to shut down every national park in the country. So stay alert, stay together, and stay safe. As the last of the visitors drove out of the park gates, a heavy silence fell over Yellowstone. It was like the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. And I had a feeling that whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be pretty. The last day the park was open felt downright surreal. It was like one of those end-of-the-world movies where everyone's freaking out but trying to pretend everything's normal. Tourists were rushing to get in those last-minute selfies with Old Faithful, while others were practically sprinting to their cars, desperate to beat the traffic. I spent most of the day directing traffic, answering panicked questions. What do you mean the park's closed? And trying to calm down a few hysterical kids who were convinced the world was ending. Let me tell you, dealing with a screaming 5-year-old who's lost his favorite teddy bear is way more stressful than any bear encounter I've ever had. As the sun started to set, the park began to empty out. The usual hum of activity, the excited chatter, the clicking cameras, the laughter of kids faded away, replaced by an unsettling quiet. It was like the whole park was holding its breath, waiting for something bad to happen. I was patrolling the western edge of the park, near the Madison River, when I noticed something strange. A group of elk were gathered at the edge of the tree line, staring intently into the woods. They were snorting and stamping their hooves, their eyes wide with fear. I'd seen elk spooked before, but this was different. They weren't just startled, they were terrified. I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the trees, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just the usual mix of pines and firs, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. But the elk were still acting weird, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped, and a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the park in an eerie silence. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant hooting of an owl. I turned on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the fog like a knife. Suddenly, I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing there. Just the fog, swirling and shifting like a ghost. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a coyote, but the hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. I decided to head back to the ranger station. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I started to quicken my pace. Just as I reached the station, I heard a low growl, deep and guttural, coming from the woods. It sent a shiver down my spine. Whatever was out there, it wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I was safe for now, but I knew that whatever was lurking in the darkness was still out there, waiting. And I had a feeling it was just getting started. The first night after the park closed was the quietest I'd ever experienced. I mean, sure, it always gets quiet at night, but this was different. This was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, the kind that makes you feel like you're the last person on Earth. I was holed up in the ranger station, a cozy little cabin with a fireplace and a surprisingly decent supply of instant coffee. Frank had taken the first watch, and I was trying to catch some sleep on the threadbare couch in the common room. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Around midnight, Frank woke me up. "Anything to report?" I asked, stifling a yawn. He shook his head, quiet as a tomb. "Eerie, ain't it? Tell me about it," I mumbled, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. We spent the next few hours talking in hushed tones, sharing stories about our weirdest encounters in the park. Frank had been a ranger for over 30 years, and he had some wild tales about close calls with bears, mountain lions, and even a few poachers. But none of his stories were as unsettling as the feeling that was creeping up my spine. As dawn approached, Frank decided to head out for a patrol. "Just gonna take a quick look around," he said. "Make sure everything's still in one piece." I watched him through the window as he disappeared into the fog. He was carrying a rifle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something he couldn't handle. An hour passed, then two. Frank still hadn't returned. I started to pace the floor, my anxiety growing with every passing minute. Where the hell was he? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my own rifle and headed out into the fog. The silence was even more oppressive now, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the frozen ground. I followed Frank's usual patrol route, scanning the trees for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that he'd ever been there. Then I heard it. A faint sound carried on the wind. It was a low, guttural growl, the same sound I'd heard the night before. But this time, it was closer. Much closer. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by a series of heavy footsteps. Something was moving through the trees. Something big and dangerous. I raised my rifle, my finger tightening on the trigger, but I couldn't see anything through the thick fog. The footsteps were getting closer, and I could feel the ground vibrate beneath my feet. Suddenly, the fog parted, and I saw it. A creature unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs and glowing red eyes. Its skin was pale and translucent, and its mouth was filled with rows of sharp teeth. I gasped, my fingers slipping from the trigger. The creature let out a deafening roar, and I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I just kept running, the sound of its footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached the ranger station, slamming the door shut and bolting it behind me. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for air, my lungs burning. My legs felt like jelly, and my whole body was shaking. I had seen it. I had actually seen one of those things. Whatever they were, I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew it was real. I had seen the creature's glowing red eyes, its pale, translucent skin, its rows of razor-sharp teeth. I grabbed my rifle and checked the magazine. Full. Good. I wasn't going to let that thing get me without a fight. I peered out the window, scanning the fog-shrouded landscape. Nothing. But I could still hear it. A low, guttural growl echoing through the trees. It was circling the station, hunting me. I knew I couldn't stay there. It was only a matter of time before that thing found a way in. I had to get out of the park, find help. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with some essentials, a first aid kit, a flashlight, a few protein bars. Then I hesitated. What about Frank? I couldn't just leave him out there. But what could I do? I was no match for that creature. Going back out there would be suicide. I cursed under my breath. Damn it, Frank. Why did you have to go out there alone? I took a deep breath and made a decision. I would leave a note for Frank, telling him where I was going. If he made it back to the station, he would know where to find me. I scribbled a quick note on a piece of paper and left it on the table. Then I opened the back door and slipped out into the fog. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows, my senses on high alert. The growling was getting closer. It was toying with me, herding me like a sheep. I reached the edge of the woods and paused, listening. The growling had stopped. Had it lost my scent? I took a tentative step forward, then another. I was almost at the tree line when I heard it. A twig snapping underfoot. I froze. It was right behind me. I spun around, raising my rifle. But it was too late. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched. I screamed and fired, the rifle bucking in my hands. The creature roared in pain, stumbling back. I fired again and again until the magazine was empty. The creature collapsed on the ground, its chest heaving. I watched in horror as it slowly got back to its feet, its eyes burning with rage. It lunged again, and this time, I had no defense. I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Instead, I heard a deafening roar, followed by a sickening crunch. I opened my eyes and saw Frank standing over the creature, his rifle smoking. The creature lay motionless on the ground, its head crushed. "Frank," I cried, relief flooding through me. He grinned. "Missed me, kid?" I ran to him, throwing my arms around him. He hugged me back, his grip strong and reassuring. "I thought you were dead," I said, my voice trembling. He chuckled. "Not quite, but it was a close call." He pointed to the creature's body. "That thing's tougher than it looks." Took 2 shots to the head to bring it down. I stared at the creature, my stomach churning. "What the hell is it, Frank?" He shook his head. "I don't know, kid, but I've got a feeling we're about to find out." We dragged the creature's carcass back to the ranger station, the adrenaline slowly wearing off and giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. Frank, bless his tough old hide, seemed almost energized by the encounter, but I was about ready to collapse. "We gotta figure out what this thing is," Frank said, prodding the creature with his boot. "Never seen anything like it in all my years in the park." "Me neither," I said, staring at the creature's grotesque form. "It's like something out of a nightmare." We hauled the body into the station's small lab, a room usually reserved for analyzing soil samples and identifying animal tracks. Now, it was home to a monster. Frank started rummaging through the cabinets, pulling out scalpels, forceps, and other tools I'd only ever seen in horror movies. "Let's get to work," he said, a grim determination in his eyes. I wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea of dissecting the creature that had nearly killed me, but I knew we had to learn more about it. We spent the next few hours examining the body, taking samples, and making notes. The creature's skin was surprisingly tough, almost like leather. Its bones were hollow and lightweight, yet incredibly strong. And its teeth, those were something else. They were serrated and curved, like miniature shark teeth. But the most disturbing discovery was inside the creature's skull. Its brain was unlike anything we'd ever seen. It was large and complex, with intricate folds and convolutions. It looked almost human. "This thing's intelligent," Frank said, his voice hushed. "Too intelligent." We continued our examination, and eventually we found something that made our blood run cold. A small, metallic implant embedded in the base of the creature's skull. "What the hell is that?" I asked, pointing to the implant. Frank carefully extracted the implant with a pair of tweezers. It was a tiny, intricate device, covered in strange symbols. "I don't know," Frank said, his brow furrowed, "but I think we need to call someone about this." He reached for the radio, but I stopped him. "Wait," I said. What if this thing is connected to the park closures? What if the government knows about these creatures? Frank hesitated. You think they're behind this? I don't know, I said, but I think we need to be careful who we trust. We decided to keep our discovery a secret for now. We hid the implant and continued our examination of the creature, hoping to find more clues. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in over our heads. We were dealing with something far beyond our understanding, something that could threaten the entire world, and we were all alone. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. We were constantly on edge, expecting another attack at any moment. We took turns keeping watch, our rifles always at the ready. Sleep was a luxury we could barely afford. The radio remained silent. No contact from the outside world. We were completely isolated, trapped in a nightmare with no escape in sight. Frank was convinced that more of those creatures were out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. They're hunters, he'd say, his eyes scanning the tree line. They'll be back. I tried to stay positive, but it was hard. The silence was oppressive. The fog was suffocating, and the feeling of being watched was constant. I felt like a rat in a maze, with a predator lurking around every corner. One morning, as I was patrolling the perimeter of the station, I noticed something strange. A set of tracks in the mud, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were large and clawed, with an almost human-like shape. I followed the tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. They led me deeper into the woods, away from the safety of the station. This is stupid, I muttered to myself. I should turn back. But curiosity got the better of me. I had to know where those tracks were going. I continued to follow the tracks, my grip tightening on my rifle. The forest grew darker and denser, the fog swirling around me like a shroud. Suddenly, the tracks disappeared. I stopped, confused. Where had they gone? Then I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, coming from the trees behind me. I spun around, raising my rifle, but it was too late. The creature lunged from the shadows, its claws outstretched. I fired, the rifle bucking in my hands. The creature roared in pain, stumbling back. I fired again, but it kept coming. I turned and ran, the creature hot on my heels. I dodged through the trees, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for rest. But the creature was faster. It was gaining on me. I stumbled and fell, my rifle clattering to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, but the creature was upon me. It pinned me to the ground, its claws digging into my flesh. I screamed, struggling to break free. But it was no use. The creature was too strong. It opened its jaws, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but the bite never came. Instead, I heard a deafening roar, followed by a sickening crunch. I opened my eyes and saw Frank standing over the creature, his rifle smoking. The creature lay motionless on the ground, its head crushed. "Frank," I cried, relief flooding through me. He grinned. "Looks like I got here, just in time." I scrambled to my feet, my body shaking. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't mention it, kid. Just doing my job." We stood there for a moment, catching our breath. Then Frank looked down at the creature's body. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice grim. "There's more of them out there, and they're hunting us." We knew we couldn't outrun those things. They were faster, stronger, and they had the home field advantage. So, we decided to do what any sensible person trapped in a horror movie would do. We set a trap. Frank, ever the resourceful one, came up with a plan. We'd lure the creatures to the maintenance shed, a sturdy building with thick metal doors and a reinforced roof. Inside, we'd rig up a makeshift electric fence using spare cables, a generator, and a whole lot of hope. "It's risky," Frank admitted, "but it's our best shot." I nodded, my heart pounding. "Let's do it." We spent the next few hours gathering supplies and setting up the trap. It was tense work, our nerves frayed, our ears constantly straining for any sign of the creatures. But we managed to get it done. As dusk fell, we retreated to the ranger station, leaving the maintenance shed bathed in the eerie glow of the generator's floodlights. We watched from the window, our rifles at the ready. The waiting was agonizing. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent our hearts racing. But the creatures didn't show. Hours passed. The moon rose high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. Just when we were starting to think our plan had failed, we heard it. A low growl echoing through the trees. Then another and another. They were coming. We watched as the creatures emerged from the fog, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. They moved with a terrifying grace, their long limbs carrying them effortlessly across the terrain. They approached the maintenance shed cautiously, sniffing the air. Then, one of them stepped into the pool of light. The trap sprang. A surge of electricity coursed through the cables, engulfing the creature in a blinding flash. It let out a deafening roar, its body convulsing violently. The other creatures hesitated, their eyes fixed on their fallen comrade. Then, with a terrifying determination, they charged. We opened fire, our rifles spitting flames into the night. The creatures roared and snarled, their bodies riddled with bullets, but they kept coming. One by one, they fell victim to the electric fence, their bodies jerking and twitching as the current surged through them. The air filled with the smell of burning flesh and ozone. Finally, it was over. The last creature lay dead on the ground, its eyes staring blankly at the sky. We emerged from the ranger station cautiously, our rifles still trained on the fallen creatures. The silence was deafening. We had won, for now. The silence after the battle was deafening. The only sound was the crackling of the electric fence and the ragged breathing of myself and Frank. We stood there among the fallen creatures, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. The smell of burning flesh was thick in the air, and the sight of the creatures' twisted and contorted bodies was enough to make my stomach churn. But we couldn't afford to dwell on the horror. We had to assess the situation and figure out our next move. "How many were there?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Frank surveyed the scene, his face grim. "7. 7 that we know of." 7. We had taken down 7 of those things. It felt like a victory, but a hollow one. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a park that had become a hunting ground. We made our way back to the ranger station, our steps heavy and our minds racing. We needed to contact the outside world, let someone know what was happening. But the radio was still dead. Damn it, Frank muttered, slamming his fist on the table. We're on our own. We spent the next few hours patching ourselves up and trying to make sense of what had happened. Frank had sustained a nasty gash on his arm, and I had a collection of bruises and cuts that were starting to throb. But we were alive. That was the main thing. As the sun began to set, a sense of dread crept over us. We knew the creatures would be back. They were relentless, driven by a hunger that we couldn't comprehend. We barricaded the station as best we could, reinforcing the doors and windows with whatever we could find. We gathered our weapons and ammunition, preparing for another long night. But as darkness fell, something unexpected happened. The fog began to dissipate. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting a silvery light over the landscape. And then we saw them. Not the creatures, but lights, headlights, approaching from the park entrance. A convoy of vehicles was making its way towards the station, their lights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. We watched in disbelief as they drew closer, our hearts pounding with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Who were they? Were they friend or foe? We didn't know, but we were about to find out.
The convoy came to a halt outside the ranger station, and a group of men and women in unmarked uniforms piled out. They were armed and cautious, their eyes scanning the surroundings with a mixture of apprehension and determination. One of them, a woman with short, gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached us. "I'm Agent Parker," she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. "We received your distress signal." "Distress signal?" We exchanged puzzled glances. We hadn't sent any signal. "The implant," Frank said suddenly. "It must have transmitted something when we removed it." Agent Parker nodded. "It seems you stumbled onto something far bigger than you could have imagined." She gestured towards the convoy. "We're here to evacuate you and secure the area." "Evacuate? Secure the area? What did that even mean?" Before we could ask any questions, Agent Parker barked orders at her team. They moved with military precision, securing the perimeter, setting up communication equipment, and preparing a helicopter for extraction. We were ushered towards the helicopter, our heads spinning with questions. What were those creatures? Who were these people? What was really going on? As the helicopter lifted off, I looked back at the park, shrouded in the fading light of dusk. It was a place of beauty and wonder, a place I had called home for years. Now, it was a place of fear and death. Agent Parker sat opposite us, her expression grim. "I know you have a lot of questions," she said, "but I can't answer them all right now. Just know that you're not alone in this, and we're going to do everything we can to stop these creatures." "Stop them? How?" The helicopter soared through the night sky, leaving the park behind. I looked out the window, my heart heavy. With a sense of foreboding, they took us to a secret facility, some kind of underground bunker hidden deep in the Nevada desert. It was like something out of a sci-fi movie, all sterile white walls, blinking lights, and people in hazmat suits. They ran a battery of tests on us, drew blood, scanned our brains, the whole 9 yards. Frank and I were kept in separate rooms, and I didn't see him for days. The only contact I had was with Agent Parker, who would occasionally show up to ask me more questions about the creatures. She still wasn't giving up much information, but I managed to piece together a few things. Apparently, the creatures weren't aliens, as some of the crazier theories had suggested. They were something else, something created in a lab, a bioengineered weapon gone wrong, and the government had lost control. That explained the park closures, the secrecy, the whole damn mess. They were trying to contain the outbreak, but they were failing. One day, Agent Parker came to my room with a grave expression. "We've had a breach," she said. "The creatures have infiltrated another facility. We need your help." My help? What could I possibly do? "You've encountered these creatures," she explained. "You've survived their attacks. You know how they think, how they hunt. We need that knowledge." So, they were sending me back into the field. They equipped me with some high-tech gear, night vision goggles, a thermal imaging device, a weapon that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. Then they loaded me onto another helicopter, this one headed towards a new location, a place they called Site B. As the helicopter approached the site, I saw it. A sprawling complex, surrounded by a high fence, bathed in the eerie glow of emergency lights. Smoke billowed from several buildings, and I could hear the distant sound of gunfire. The creatures had already infiltrated the facility, and I was being sent in to clean up the mess. The helicopter landed on the roof, and I stepped out into the chaos. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of blood. Gunfire erupted from below, and I could hear screams echoing through the corridors. I took a deep breath, activated my night vision goggles, and stepped into the darkness. This was it, the final showdown. But as I made my way through the facility, I realized something. The creatures were different. They were larger, stronger, and more aggressive than the ones I had encountered in Yellowstone. And there were more of them. Many more. I fought my way through the corridors, using every weapon and tactic at my disposal. But it was a losing battle. The creatures were everywhere, relentless and unstoppable. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I stumbled upon a lab. Inside, I found a scientist huddled in a corner, his face pale with fear. "They're evolving," he gasped. "They're learning. We can't stop them." Evolving? Learning? What did that mean? Before I could ask any more questions, the door burst open, and a creature lunged into the room. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was massive, its skin covered in thick scales, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence. I raised my weapon, but it was too late. The creature swatted me aside like a fly, sending me crashing into a wall. I lay there, dazed and helpless, as the creature advanced. This was it. The end. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature stopped. It tilted its head as if studying me. Then, it spoke. "You are different," it said, its voice deep and resonant. "You are interesting." I stared at the creature, my mind reeling. It could talk? "We have plans for you," the creature continued. "Plans for your kind." Then, everything went black.
Red River Gorge has always been a place of dark legends and eerie tales. Locals whisper about strange lights in the woods, unexplained sounds, and the occasional disappearance. But hey, we were young, invincible, and definitely not the type to be spooked by a few campfire stories. So, my friend Mark and I packed our gear and headed out for a weekend of camping and conquering our fears. The drive to the gorge was beautiful, even if the GPS kept losing signal. The fall colors were in full effect, painting the hillsides in fiery reds and oranges. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the beauty took on a bit of a sinister edge. The shadows seemed to deepen, and the silence of the woods felt less peaceful and more expectant. We finally found our campsite, a secluded spot nestled among towering trees. It was perfect, or at least it would have been, if the wind wasn't whistling through the branches like a ghostly choir. We set up our tents, the nylon snapping in the breeze like a flag of impending doom. Mark, ever the optimist, got a fire going while I wrestled with the camp stove. "Dude, relax," Mark chuckled, tossing another log onto the flames. "You're acting like something's gonna jump out and grab us." I forced a laugh. "Yeah, right. Just a little jumpy, I guess." But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The woods seemed to be watching us, their dark eyes peering from behind every tree trunk. As darkness fell, we huddled around the fire, swapping stories and roasting marshmallows. Mark, the master of campfire tales, regaled me with local legends of the Gorge Goblin and the Red River Wraith. I tried to laugh them off, but the stories, coupled with the unsettling atmosphere, sent shivers down my spine. Finally exhausted from the drive and the spooky stories, we decided to call it a night. We crawled into our tents, the thin nylon walls offering little comfort against the encroaching darkness. "Good night, man." Mark's voice drifted from his tent. "Try not to let the goblins bite." "Yeah, you too," I mumbled, zipping my tent shut. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the forest, the wind whispering through the trees, the crackling of the dying fire, and something else, a low growl that seemed to come from just beyond the edge of the light. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to sleep, but the growl persisted, growing louder, closer. Something was out there, and it was watching us. The growl came again, closer this time. A deep guttural sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I held my breath, praying whatever was out there wouldn't notice me. But then, a new sound cut through the night, a slow, methodical thump, thump, thump. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the forest floor. I peeked through the mesh window of my tent, but the fire had died down to embers, casting the campsite in an eerie, flickering glow. I couldn't see anything, but the sounds were getting closer. Thump, thump, thump. It was agonizingly slow, like whatever it was savoring the hunt. Suddenly, the sound stopped. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement, but there was nothing. Had it gone? Had I imagined it? Just as I was starting to relax, I heard a new sound, a soft scratching, right outside my tent. It was like something was clawing at the nylon, testing its strength. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The scratching stopped, followed by a moment of unbearable silence. Then a voice, a low, raspy whisper that sent chills down my spine. "I can smell you." I nearly jumped out of my skin. The voice was right outside my tent, close enough that I could feel its breath on the nylon. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the far wall of the tent, my mind racing. What was it? What did it want? The voice came again, closer now, whispering through the thin fabric. "I can hear you breathing." I clamped my hand over my mouth, stifling a sob. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Terror had paralyzed me. The scratching started again, more insistent this time, and the nylon of my tent began to stretch inwards, as if something was pushing against it, trying to get in. I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing for morning, wishing I'd never come to this cursed place. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see what was out there. With trembling hands, I slowly unzipped my tent. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, and I peered out into the darkness. The embers of the fire had all but died out, leaving only a faint orange glow. The woods were shrouded in shadow, the trees looming like skeletal figures against the inky sky. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Then I heard it again, the thump, 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 closer now, right outside my tent. It was accompanied by a rustling sound, like something dragging through the undergrowth. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the firelight. They were like burning coals, fixed on me, with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I gasped, stumbling backward, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. The eyes blinked, and then they were gone. I stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Was it real, or had my fear conjured up those eyes in the darkness? Then I heard a low growl, deep and menacing, coming from the direction of the eyes. It was followed by a heavy breathing, close enough that I could feel the hot, fetid breath on my face. Something was out there, something big, something dangerous, and it was right outside my tent. I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to get out of there. I scrambled out of my tent, tripping over the guy ropes in my haste. I didn't even bother to zip it up. I just ran. I ran towards Mark's tent, my feet pounding on the soft earth. I could hear the thump, thump, thump behind me, getting closer with every step. I glanced back over my shoulder, and I saw it. It was a tall, shadowy figure, moving with an unnatural grace. Its eyes glowed red in the darkness, and its mouth was open in a silent snarl. revealing rows of sharp teeth. I screamed, my voice echoing through the silent woods. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. It was hunting me. I burst into Mark's tent, gasping for breath, my voice caught in my throat. "Mark! Mark! Wake up!" He bolted upright, his eyes wide with alarm. "What the hell, man? What's wrong?" "There's something out there," I stammered, pointing towards the entrance of the tent. Something with red eyes. Mark grabbed his flashlight and shone it towards the tent flap. "What are you talking about?" "I don't see anything." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening in horror. I followed his gaze, and my blood ran cold. Standing just outside the tent, its silhouette, illuminated by the flashlight beam, was the creature. It was even more terrifying up close. Its skin was a sickly pale green, stretched taut over its gaunt frame. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in sharp claws that scraped against the ground. But it was its face that truly haunted me. Its eyes burned with a malevolent red light, and its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Mark let out a strangled cry, and the creature lunged forward, its claws tearing through the thin nylon of the tent. We screamed, scrambling back, as the creature forced its way inside. It snarled, its hot, fetid breath washing over us. We were trapped. The creature swiped at us with its claws, and we ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding its attacks. Mark grabbed a camping knife from his backpack and slashed at the creature, but the blade seemed to bounce off its tough hide. "We have to get out of here," I yelled, scrambling towards the back of the tent. The creature roared, its voice shaking the very ground beneath us. It lunged again, and this time, its claws raked across Mark's arm, drawing blood. He cried out in pain, falling back against the tent wall. I knew we couldn't fight it. We had to escape. I grabbed Mark's hand and pulled him towards the back of the tent. We kicked at the nylon wall, creating a small opening. We scrambled through the hole, tumbling out onto the cold, hard ground. We didn't stop running until we reached the tree line. We looked back, but the creature didn't follow. It just stood there, watching us from the campsite, its red eyes burning in the darkness. We were safe, for now. But we knew that we weren't out of the woods yet. We didn't stop running until we were deep in the woods, our lungs burning, our legs aching. We collapsed onto the forest floor, gasping for breath, our eyes darting around in the darkness, half expecting the creature to emerge from the shadows at any moment. "What the hell was that thing?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. I shook my head, my mind reeling. "I don't know." But it wasn't human. We sat there for a while, catching our breath, trying to calm our racing hearts. The silence of the forest was broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing and the distant hooting of an owl. "We can't stay here," I said finally. "We need to get out of these woods." Mark nodded. "But where do we go? We can't just wander around in the dark." I thought for a moment. We need to find a road or a trail or something, anything that will lead us out of here. We got to our feet, our bodies stiff and sore, We started walking, our eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of a path. The forest was dense, the trees crowding in on us, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a narrow trail. We didn't know where it led, but we didn't care. We followed it, hoping it would lead us to safety. As we walked, we noticed strange symbols carved into the bark of some of the trees. They were crudely drawn, but they were clearly recognizable. Circles with crosses inside, triangles with eyes in the center, and other symbols that seemed to defy description. "What do you think those are?" Mark asked, his voice hushed. I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe some kind of warning?" We continued on, our pace quickening. The symbols seemed to become more frequent, more elaborate. We felt a growing sense of unease, as if we were being watched, as if we were walking deeper into something dangerous. Then we saw it. In the distance, a faint light flickered through the trees. It was a campfire. We exchanged a look of relief. We weren't alone. There were other people out there. We hurried towards the light, our hopes rising with every step. But as we got closer, a sense of dread washed over us. The campfire was surrounded by a circle of those strange symbols, and hanging from the branches of the trees above were the remains of several backpacks, their contents scattered on the ground below. We had stumbled upon an abandoned campsite, and something told us that the people who had camped there hadn't left voluntarily. The abandoned campsite was like something out of a nightmare. Torn tents lay scattered across the clearing, their tattered remains flapping in the wind like ghostly shrouds. Sleeping bags were ripped open, their stuffing spilling out onto the muddy ground. Empty food cans and discarded gear were strewn everywhere, a testament to the campers' hasty departure. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been pretty. "This is seriously creepy," Mark muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to get out of here, like, now." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest, but something was drawing me deeper into the campsite. I felt a morbid curiosity, a need to understand what had happened here. I noticed a backpack lying near one of the tents. It was ripped and stained, but it looked relatively intact. I cautiously approached it, my eyes scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of movement. I knelt down and unzipped the backpack. Inside, I found a flashlight, a first aid kit, a few granola bars, and a small leather-bound journal. I pulled out the journal and flipped it open. The first few pages were filled with mundane entries about the campers' journey, their excitement about exploring the Red River Gorge. But as I turned the pages, the tone of the entries changed. The writer, a young woman named Sarah, described a growing sense of unease, a feeling of being watched. She mentioned seeing strange symbols carved into the trees, hearing strange sounds at night. Then, the entries became more frantic, more desperate. Sarah described seeing a creature in the woods, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. She wrote about the creature stalking them, tormenting them, driving them to the brink of madness. The final entry was scrawled in a hurried, panicked hand. Sarah wrote about the creature attacking their campsite, tearing through their tents, killing her friends. She wrote about running for her life, praying that she would escape. The journal ended abruptly. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Sarah's story was terrifying, and it confirmed our worst fears. We weren't just dealing with some random creature. We were dealing with something that hunted humans. "What did you find?" Mark asked, his voice tense. I showed him the journal. This explains everything." Mark's face paled as he read Sarah's words. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. Now, we left the abandoned campsite, the journal's chilling words echoing in our minds. We didn't know where to go, but we knew one thing. We couldn't stay in these woods any longer. We stumbled through the woods, our senses on high alert. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent our hearts racing. We knew the creature was out there, somewhere in the darkness, watching us, waiting for its chance to strike. The forest seemed to press in on us, the trees looming like silent sentinels. The air was thick with a sense of dread, a feeling that we were being hunted. We tried to retrace our steps, to find our way back to the main trail, but the woods seemed to shift and change around us, disorienting us, confusing us. We were lost. As we walked, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of movement in the trees, a fleeting glimpse of something dark and shadowy. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Mark nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Yeah." "What was it?" We strained our eyes, trying to pierce the gloom, but we couldn't see anything. The forest was silent, still. Then we heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, echoing through the trees. It was the creature. We exchanged a look of terror. We had to get out of there. We started running again, blindly, desperately, our feet pounding on the forest floor. We didn't know where we were going, but we didn't care. We just had to get away from the creature. We ran for what felt like hours, our lungs burning, our legs aching. We stumbled and fell, but we picked ourselves up and kept running. Finally, we burst out of the trees and into a clearing. We collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. We looked back at the woods, but there was no sign of the creature. We were safe for now, but as we lay there, catching our breath, we noticed something strange. The clearing was eerily silent. There were no birds singing, no insects chirping, no wind rustling through the leaves. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. And then we saw it. In the center of the clearing, a single tree stood tall and stark, and carved into its bark was a symbol we recognized all too well, the same symbol we had seen on the trees near the abandoned campsite, the same symbol that had haunted our nightmares. We were not safe. We were not even close. We didn't need another reminder that we were being hunted. The symbol carved into the tree was like a giant neon "You're screwed" sign. We scrambled back to our feet, adrenaline jolting us into action. We had to get out of that clearing, and fast. But as we turned to run, we heard a sound that stopped us dead in our tracks. It was a low, guttural growl, coming from the woods behind us. The creature had found us. We spun around, our eyes frantically searching the shadows. We couldn't see it, but we could hear it moving, its heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth. It was closing in. Panic surged through me. We were trapped, with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "What do we do?" Mark whispered, his voice filled with fear. I didn't have an answer. I was just as terrified as he was. But we couldn't just stand there and wait to be slaughtered. We had to fight back. I grabbed a thick branch from the ground and held it out in front of me, like a makeshift weapon. Mark did the same. The growling grew louder, closer. The creature was almost upon us. Suddenly, it burst out of the trees, its red eyes blazing in the darkness. It was even more terrifying than we remembered. Its skin, a sickly green, its limbs long and spindly, its claws sharp as razors. It lunged at us, its jaws open wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. We screamed and swung our branches, but the creature was too fast, too strong. It knocked Mark to the ground, its claws tearing into his flesh. Mark cried out in pain, his blood staining the ground beneath him. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just stand there and watch my friend die. I charged at the creature, swinging my branch with all my might. It connected with the creature's head, and it let out a roar of pain. The creature turned its attention to me, its eyes burning with rage. It swiped at me with its claws, but I managed to dodge its attack. I swung my branch again, hitting the creature in the chest. It stumbled backward, its breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I had hurt it, but I also knew that I couldn't keep this up for long. I needed to find a way to escape. I glanced around the clearing, desperately searching for an escape route, and then I saw it, the tree with the symbol carved into its bark. I didn't know what it meant, but I had a feeling it was important. I ran towards the tree, the creature hot on my heels. I reached the tree and pressed my hand against the symbol. As soon as I did, a blinding light erupted from the tree, engulfing the clearing. I shielded my eyes, and when I could see again, the creature was gone. Mark was lying on the ground, unconscious, but he was alive. We had survived. We didn't waste any time. We threw our trashed gear into the car, not even bothering to pack properly. We just needed to get the hell out of there. I jumped behind the wheel, Mark beside me, his face still pale and his arm bleeding. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and we tore out of the campsite, leaving behind the remnants of our shattered peace of mind. The dirt road was rough, the car bouncing and swerving as we sped through the darkness. The headlights barely cut through the thick trees, and the forest seemed to close in on us, like it was trying to swallow us whole. "Faster!" Mark yelled, his voice strained. "I think it's following us." I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart leaped into my throat. There, in the distance, I saw two glowing red eyes, like burning coals, staring at us from the darkness. The creature was back. I floored the gas pedal, pushing the car to its limits. The engine roared, and the tires screeched as we careened around the curves. But the eyes in the rearview mirror were getting closer. Suddenly, there was a loud crash on the roof of the car. We both screamed, our heads hitting the ceiling. The car swerved violently, and I struggled to keep it on the road. "What was that?" Mark yelled, his voice filled with panic. "I don't know," I shouted back, my eyes glued to the road. "Just hold on." Another crash, even louder this time. The car lurched to the side, and I felt something heavy land on the roof. Claws scraped against the metal, and we could hear the creature snarling and growling above us. "It's on the roof," Mark screamed, his eyes wide with terror. "It's trying to get in." I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. I had to get us out of this. I had to get us to safety. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt. The creature on the roof was thrown off balance, and it rolled off the car with a thud. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into reverse and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. We sped backwards, the headlights illuminating the creature as it scrambled to its feet. It roared in frustration and started chasing us, its long limbs carrying it across the rough terrain with surprising speed. But we were faster. We sped away, leaving the creature behind in the dust. We didn't stop driving until we reached the highway. We looked back, but there was no sign of the creature. We were finally safe, or so we thought. We didn't waste any time. We threw our trashed gear into the car, not even bothering to pack properly. We just needed to get the hell out of there. I jumped behind the wheel, Mark beside me, his face still pale and his arm bleeding. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and we tore out of the campsite, leaving behind the remnants of our shattered peace of mind. The dirt road was rough, the car bouncing and swerving as we sped through the darkness. The headlights barely cut through the thick trees, and the forest seemed to close in on us, like it was trying to swallow us whole. "Faster!" Mark yelled, his voice strained. "I think it's following us." I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart leaped into my throat. There, in the distance, I saw two glowing red eyes, like burning coals, staring at us from the darkness. The creature was back. I floored the gas pedal, pushing the car to its limits. The engine roared, and the tires screeched as we careened around the curves. But the eyes in the rearview mirror were getting closer. Suddenly, there was a loud crash on the roof of the car. We both screamed, our heads hitting the ceiling. The car swerved violently, and I struggled to keep it on the road. "What was that?" Mark yelled, his voice filled with panic. "I don't know," I shouted back, my eyes glued to the road. "Just hold on." Another crash, even louder this time. The car lurched to the side, and I felt something heavy land on the roof. Claws scraped against the metal, and we could hear the creature snarling and growling above us. "It's on the roof," Mark screamed, his eyes wide with terror. "It's trying to get in." I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. I had to get us out of this. I had to get us to safety. I slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt. The creature on the roof was thrown off balance, and it rolled off the car with a thud. I didn't hesitate. I threw the car into reverse and slammed my foot on the gas pedal. We sped backwards, the headlights illuminating the creature as it scrambled to its feet. It roared in frustration and started chasing us, its long limbs carrying it across the rough terrain with surprising speed. But we were faster. We sped away, leaving the creature behind in the dust. We didn't stop driving until we reached the highway. We looked back, but there was no sign of the creature. We were finally safe, or so we thought. We thought we were safe. We thought we had outrun it. We were wrong. The highway stretched out before us like an endless black ribbon, the headlights of our car cutting through the darkness. We were miles away from the Red River Gorge, from the creature, from the nightmare we had just endured. But the feeling of dread lingered, a cold knot in our stomachs that refused to unravel. We drove in silence, each lost in our own thoughts, replaying the events of the past few days in our minds. The strange symbols, the abandoned campsite, the creature with the glowing red eyes, the chase through the woods, it all felt like a bad dream, a surreal and terrifying experience that we couldn't quite comprehend. Mark was the first to break the silence. "Do you think it's really gone?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I shrugged, trying to appear confident. "I don't know, man. I hope so." But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. There was something about the creature, something about the way it had vanished, that told me it wasn't over. It felt like it was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, watching us, waiting for its chance to strike again. We drove for hours, the silence in the car growing heavier with each passing mile. The exhaustion was starting to catch up with us, our eyelids growing heavy, our minds drifting. I glanced at Mark, and I saw that he was already asleep, his head slumped against the window. I envied him. I wished I could close my eyes and forget about everything, even if just for a few minutes. But I couldn't. I had a feeling that if I closed my eyes, even for a second, the creature would be back. I kept driving, my eyes fixed on the road, my mind racing. I thought about the journal we had found, about Sarah's final entry, about her desperate plea for help. I wondered if she had ever escaped, if she had ever found safety. And then I saw it. In the distance, a pair of headlights appeared in the oncoming lane. They were approaching fast, too fast. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but the headlights were still there, growing brighter with every second. I realized that the car wasn't slowing down. It was heading straight towards us. I slammed on the brakes, swerving to the side of the road. The oncoming car sped past us, a blur of metal and light. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. We had avoided a head-on collision by a hair's breadth. But as I looked back at the receding taillights, I noticed something strange. There was a symbol painted on the back of the car. A symbol I recognized all too well. The same symbol we had seen on the trees, on the journal, on the creature itself. The car disappeared into the darkness, leaving us alone on the empty highway. But the symbol lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder that the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. I'm sitting here in my ranger station, staring at this flickering TV screen, and I still can't believe what I'm seeing. They just closed all the national parks, like every single one. No warning, no explanation, just immediate and indefinite closure due to safety concerns. What the hell does that even mean? I've been a ranger at Yellowstone for 5 years now, and I've never seen anything like this. We get the occasional bear encounter, some lost hikers, maybe a wildfire now and then, but nothing that would warrant shutting down the whole damn park system. The news lady on the screen keeps repeating the same vague crap about unforeseen circumstances and ensuring public safety, but her eyes are wide with fear, and I can hear the tremor in her voice. Something's not right, and it's freaking me out. Outside, the usually bustling park is eerily silent. The last of the visitors cleared out hours ago, their faces a mix of confusion and annoyance. I don't blame them. I'm pretty pissed off myself. We had to evacuate everyone, cut short vacations, ruin family trips, all for some mysterious safety concerns. Now, the only sounds are the wind whistling through the pines and the distant howl of a lone wolf. It's the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The kind of quiet that screams something bad is about to happen. I glance at the radio, the static filling the silence. No updates, no further instructions, just nothing. It's like the whole world has gone dark, and we're stuck here in this abandoned park, waiting for whatever the hell is coming next. The next morning, the silence was even more unsettling. The usual chatter of the radio was gone, replaced by an endless hiss of static. I tried contacting headquarters, other ranger stations, even nearby towns, but all I got was that damn static. It was like we were cut off from the rest of the world, trapped in this eerie bubble of quiet. Around noon, a call came in, or rather, a garbled distress signal, barely audible through the static. It was Ranger Mike, out on patrol near the geyser basin. He sounded panicked, yelling something about tracks not human can't. Then the signal cut out completely. My heart pounded in my chest. Mike was a seasoned ranger, not the type to get spooked easily. If he was scared, something was seriously wrong. I grabbed my gear, hopped into my truck, and sped towards the geyser basin, the urgency growing with every mile. When I reached Mike's last known location, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. His truck was parked haphazardly by the side of the road, the engine still running, the driver's door wide open. His backpack lay on the ground, its contents spilled out: a water bottle, a compass, a half-eaten granola bar. No Mike. I examined the area, my pulse quickening with every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches. There were tracks leading away from the truck, large, deep prints unlike anything I'd seen before. They weren't bear tracks, not wolf tracks, not anything I could identify. Whatever made those prints, it wasn't human. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The official explanation would be a bear attack, a rogue mountain lion, something to appease the public. But I knew better. Something was hunting in these woods, something far more sinister than any animal. As the sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the clearing, I knew I had to get out of there. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something glinting in the fading light. It was Mike's ranger badge, lying half hidden in the dirt, scratched and dented, as if it had been chewed on. Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent jolts of fear through me. I kept replaying Mike's garbled message, those strange tracks, the chewed-up badge, and a cold dread settled in my gut. The next morning I decided to head back to the geyser basin. Call it morbid curiosity, call it a desperate need for answers, but I had to see if I could find anything else, any clue to what happened to Mike. The forest seemed to press in on me as I hiked, the silence broken only by the crunch of my boots on the trail. The sunlight, filtering through the trees, felt weak and thin, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Then I saw it. Carved into the trunk of a towering pine, a series of symbols. They weren't Native American markings, not anything I recognized. They were crude, almost childlike, but there was something undeniably unsettling about them. It was like a warning, a desperate plea etched into the bark. As I ventured deeper, I found more markings, some on trees, some on rocks, all different, all disturbing. It was like I was being led somewhere, drawn deeper into the heart of the woods. That evening, I found myself in a small town just outside the park boundary. The locals were tight-lipped, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. But after a few beers at the dusty saloon, some of them started to open up. They told stories of strange lights in the sky, of people vanishing without a trace, of whispers in the dark that spoke of ancient beings and forbidden places. One old-timer, his face weathered and worn, leaned in close and whispered, "This land, it ain't meant for us. Something else lives here, something old and hungry." His words echoed in my mind as I left the saloon, the darkness seeming to press in around me. I glanced back at the park, the silhouette of the mountains rising against the night sky. Something was out there, something watching, waiting, and I had a feeling it was coming for me next. The old-timer's words kept ringing in my ears as I made my way back to the park. Something old and hungry. What the hell did that even mean? Was I going crazy? Or was there really something supernatural lurking in these woods? I decided to investigate the area where Mike disappeared again, hoping to find something, anything, that would make sense of all this. As I hiked through the dense forest, a sense of unease washed over me. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, unlike any animal I'd ever heard before. It echoed through the trees, sending chills down my spine. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, straining to hear any movement. Suddenly, the bushes ahead of me rustled violently. I gripped my flashlight, my finger hovering over the switch. Something was moving in there, something big. I took a deep breath and flicked on the light. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a pair of eyes, glowing an eerie yellow in the shadows. They were huge, almond-shaped, and filled with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. Before I could react, a creature emerged from the bushes. It was tall and gaunt, with skin that seemed to absorb the light. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in clawed hands that scraped against the ground. Its head was elongated, with a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. I gasped, my flashlight falling from my trembling hand. The creature let out a hiss, its eyes fixated on me. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root, sending me crashing to the ground. The creature lunged, its claws reaching for me. I scrambled back, fear coursing through my veins. Just as I thought it was going to grab me, it suddenly stopped, its head cocked to the side, as if listening to something. Then, in a flash of light and a deafening roar, it was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving me shaking and gasping for breath on the forest floor. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, my mind reeling from what I had just seen. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't of this world. The old-timer's words came back to me, something old and hungry. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was hungry for us.
After that encounter, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to tell someone, warn someone, but who would believe me? Hey, I saw a freaking alien in the woods, and it tried to eat me. Yeah, right. I'd be laughed out of town, or worse, locked up in a padded room, but I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. So, I started digging. I spent hours online, scouring news reports, forums, anything related to the park closure. And that's when I stumbled upon something truly disturbing. There were whispers, rumors of strange occurrences in other national parks, disappearances, unexplained lights, even bizarre animal behavior. It was all hushed up, of course, attributed to natural causes, or simply dismissed as hoaxes. But I knew better. I started digging deeper, hacking into Park Service databases, intercepting encrypted communications. It was risky, but I was desperate for answers. And what I found chilled me to the bone. Redacted reports, classified documents, all hinting at a government conspiracy that went far beyond anything I could have imagined. There were mentions of extraterrestrial entities, unidentified aerial phenomena, and containment protocol. It was like something out of a sci-fi movie. Except this was real. The more I uncovered, the more terrified I became. The government knew about these creatures, they knew about the abductions, and they were doing everything they could to keep it a secret. But why? What were they hiding? And what were these creatures planning? I knew I had to get to the bottom of this, but I also knew I was in over my head. I needed help, someone I could trust. But as I pondered my next move, a message popped up on my screen. It was from an anonymous source. "They're watching you," the message read. "They know you're close. Be careful." The anonymous message shook me. They were watching me. But who were they? The government? The aliens? Or something else entirely? Paranoia gnawed at me, making me question every shadow, every sound. I decided to meet with my mysterious informant. We arranged a rendezvous at an abandoned ranger station deep within the park, a place we hoped would be off the grid. As I approached the station, a sense of dread washed over me. The building was shrouded in an unnatural darkness, the windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle, unsure if I should go in. But curiosity, and perhaps a touch of recklessness, got the better of me. I pushed open the door, stepping into the cold, musty interior. The air was thick with dust, and the scent of a single flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing my informant, a woman with tired eyes and a haunted expression. She told me her story, a chilling tale of abductions, experiments, and a government cover-up that stretched back decades. She showed me evidence, photos, documents, even a strange metallic implant she claimed had been removed from her. As we spoke, a sound pierced the silence, a high-pitched whine that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the station. We exchanged a terrified look, knowing what was coming. Suddenly, a blinding light engulfed the building. I shielded my eyes, the whine intensifying, drilling into my skull. I could hear the woman screaming, her voice swallowed by the deafening roar. Then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The light vanished, the whine subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence. I blinked, my vision slowly returning. The woman was gone. I stumbled out of the station, my heart pounding in my chest. The sky was filled with a swirling vortex of stars, a portal to some unknown dimension. I watched in horror as a dark, disc-shaped object ascended from the forest, carrying its captive into the night. I knew then that the fight had just begun. These creatures were real. They were abducting people, and I was next. I was reeling. The abduction burned into my memory. The woman's screams, the blinding light, the sheer terror of it all. It was almost too much to bear. But I knew I couldn't give in to I had to fight back. For myself, for the woman, for everyone who had been I went underground, literally. I abandoned my ranger station, seeking refuge in the vast network of tunnels and caves beneath the park. It was a risky move, but I knew I couldn't stay above ground, not with those things. I wasn't alone. Through encrypted messages and coded signals, I connected with other survivors, other park rangers and locals who had witnessed We were a ragtag bunch, united by fear and a desperate need for answers. We called ourselves the Guardians, a network of resistance against the unknown. We shared information, resources, and most importantly, hope. We were each other's lifeline in this terrifying new reality. We learned that the abductions had been happening for years, systematically and silently. The government had been covering it up, silencing witnesses, and dismissing the disappearances as accidents or animal attacks. But we knew the truth. We also learned that the creatures were not just abducting people randomly. They were targeting specific individuals, people with certain skills or abilities. What they were doing with them, we didn't know. But we were determined to find out. We started planning a counteroffensive, a way to fight back against these creatures and expose the truth to the world. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but we had nothing left to lose. We were the Guardians, and we would not go down without a fight.
The caves were our sanctuary, our base of operations. We mapped out the network, established communication relays, and stockpiled supplies. We were like a band of rebels, hiding from the authorities and the creatures they were protecting, but hiding wasn't enough. We needed answers. We needed to know what those things were, what they wanted, and how to stop them. Our intel pointed to a restricted zone deep within the park, a place marked on old maps as forbidden. Legends spoke of ancient rituals, strange lights, and disappearances. It was a dangerous place, but we had a hunch it held the key to the mystery. We assembled a small team, the best of the Guardians, each with unique skills and a burning desire for the truth. We geared up, armed ourselves with whatever we could find, and set off into the unknown. The journey was treacherous. The tunnels were narrow, the air thick with the stench of sulfur and damp earth. We encountered strange creatures, things that slithered in the darkness and whispered from the shadows. But we pressed on, driven by our mission. After what felt like an eternity, we reached our destination, a massive cavern, its walls adorned with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. In the center of the cavern, a shimmering portal, a gateway to another dimension. We knew we were close, but we also knew we were walking into a trap. The creatures were waiting for us, their presence palpable in the charged air. We exchanged nervous glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. But there was no turning back. We stepped into the portal, and the world dissolved around us. The portal spat us out into a world that defied description. The sky was a swirling vortex of colors, the ground a pulsating mass of organic matter. Strange bioluminescent plants emitted an eerie glow, casting long, distorted shadows. The air was thick and humid, filled with the buzzing of unseen insects and the guttural cries of alien creatures. We found ourselves in a vast chamber, a hive of alien activity. Towering structures, made of a substance that resembled bone and chitin, stretched towards the alien sky. Creatures, unlike anything I had ever seen, scuttled across the floor, their multiple limbs clicking and scraping against the organic ground. In the center of the chamber, a massive, pulsating orb emitted a hypnotic light. We realized with horror that it was a holding cell, filled with abducted humans, suspended in some kind of stasis. They were being experimented on, their bodies probed and altered, their minds violated. Rage surged through me. We had to stop this, we had to save them. But we were outnumbered, outgunned, and completely out of our element. Then, one of the Guardians, a former military medic, noticed something. The creatures were vulnerable to sound, high-frequency vibrations that disrupted their nervous systems. We quickly devised a plan, using our remaining explosives and communication devices to create a sonic weapon. The battle was chaotic and brutal. The creatures swarmed us, their claws and teeth tearing at our flesh. But we fought back with everything we had, our fear fueled by adrenaline and rage. The sonic weapon worked, the high-pitched whine, sending the creatures into convulsions. But it was a desperate struggle, a race against time. We had to destroy the orb, free the captives, and get the hell out of there. One by one, the Guardians fell, their bodies ripped apart by the alien horde. But we kept fighting, driven by a desperate hope. Finally, with a last, desperate push, we reached the orb. We planted the explosives, the timer counting down. As the chamber shook with the impending explosion, we made a run for the portal, the screams of the creatures echoing behind us. We didn't look back, didn't stop running until we were back in the familiar darkness of the caves. We had won, but at a terrible cost. We had lost friends, comrades, brothers in arms, but we had saved the captives. exposed the truth, and struck a blow against the creatures that had invaded our world. We emerged from the caves, battered, bruised, and emotionally scarred. We had seen things that would haunt us forever, but we had also done something extraordinary. We had fought back against the unknown, and we had survived. The world above ground was a different place. The news was filled with reports of strange occurrences, unexplained lights, and mass disappearances. The government could no longer deny the truth, but their explanations were vague and unconvincing. They spoke of natural phenomena and isolated incidents, but we knew better. The parks remained closed, cordoned off by military forces. But the creatures were still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next opportunity. We knew that the fight was far from over. We, the Guardians, were scattered, hiding in the wilderness, waiting for the next move. We were the eyes and ears of the resistance, watching, listening, and preparing for the inevitable return of the creatures. I found myself back in Yellowstone, hiding in the abandoned ranger station where it all began. I had a laptop, a satellite phone, and a stash of weapons. I was a one-man army, a lone wolf fighting against the darkness. One night, as I was monitoring the news, a message popped up on my screen. It was from an unknown source, but the message was clear. They're coming back. Be ready. I looked out the window at the dark silhouette of the mountains against the starry sky. A shiver ran down my spine. They were coming back, and this time they would be prepared. I took a deep breath, my hand gripping the rifle beside me. I was ready. I was a guardian, and I would not let them win. This is my story, a warning to the world. The creatures are out there. They are real, and they are coming for us. Be vigilant, be prepared, and never, ever go into the parks alone. I'm not exactly Bear Grylls or anything, but I've always liked hiking. There's something about being out in nature, away from all the noise and stress of the city, that just makes me feel, I don't know, more alive? Anyway, that's how I ended up at the trailhead of Diablo Canyon, ready to tackle a 3-day solo trek. Now, Diablo Canyon isn't exactly a walk in the park. It's known for its rugged terrain, steep cliffs, and unpredictable weather. Locals tell stories about hikers getting lost or injured, even disappearing altogether. But hey, that's part of the appeal, right? Pushing your limits, testing yourself against the elements. Besides, I had all the gear, a detailed map, and a GPS tracker. What could go wrong? The first few hours were pretty uneventful. The trail wound its way through dense pine forests, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. I spotted a few deer grazing in a meadow and a hawk circling overhead. It was actually pretty peaceful. But then things started to get a bit weird. I came across a pile of bones scattered near the trail. Animal bones, I figured maybe a deer or something. But there were just so many of them, and they were bleached white, like they'd been there a long time. And then there were the markings on the trees. Strange symbols carved into the bark, like something out of a horror movie. I tried to tell myself it was just some kids messing around, but a shiver ran down my spine. As the sun began to set, I started to feel a growing sense of unease. like I was being watched. Every time a twig snapped or a bird rustled in the bushes, I would jump, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. I decided to set up camp early, hoping to shake off the creepy feeling. But as I pitched my tent, I couldn't help but think that I wasn't alone, that something out there was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping, the sunlight filtering through the trees. For a second, I actually forgot about the creepy vibes from the night before. Maybe I was just being paranoid, I told myself. After all, I hadn't seen or heard anything concrete. I packed up my tent, ate a quick breakfast of granola bars, and hit the trail. The plan was to reach a scenic overlook by midday, then find a good spot to camp for the night. I figured a long day of hiking would help clear my head. A couple of hours in, I spotted someone ahead of me on the trail, an older guy, maybe in his 60s, with a scraggly beard and a weathered face. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt and cargo pants, and he had a huge backpack that looked like it weighed a ton. As I got closer, I noticed he was moving pretty slowly, limping slightly. "Hey there," I called out, trying to be friendly. "Tough trail, huh?" He turned around, and I swear, his eyes were like ice. They just bored into me, making me feel instantly uncomfortable. "It has its challenges," he said in a gruff voice. "I'm Alex," I said, trying to keep things light. "Frank," he replied, his eyes still fixed on me. There was something about this guy that just screamed weird. Maybe it was the intense stare, or the way he seemed to appear out of nowhere. Or maybe it was just my paranoia from the night before playing tricks on me. Whatever it was, I decided to pick up the pace and put some distance between us. But Frank wasn't having it. He kept pace with me, his limp seemingly less pronounced now. We hiked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunching of our boots on the trail. "So, you hiking alone?" he finally asked, his voice rough like sandpaper. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my answer short. "Just trying to get away from it all for a few days." "I understand," he said, nodding slowly. "Sometimes you need to be alone, to clear your head, to face your demons." Okay, that was officially creepy. How did he know I was trying to clear my head? Had he been watching me? I felt a shiver run down my spine, and I quickened my pace again. But Frank stayed right with me. "You know," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "these woods, they have a way of revealing things you might not want to see." I didn't like where this was going. I tried to politely excuse myself, saying I wanted to enjoy the scenery in peace. But Frank just chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that echoed through the trees. "We all have our secrets, Alex," he said, his eyes boring into me. "And the woods, they have a way of bringing them to light." I tried to shake off the creepy vibes Frank was giving me, but his words kept echoing in my head. "These woods, they have a way of revealing things." What the hell did that even mean? Was he just some harmless weirdo, or was there something more sinister going on? I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the trail. The scenery was pretty amazing, I had to admit. Towering cliffs, lush greenery, a crystal clear creek rushing alongside the path. It was almost enough to make me forget about the creepy old dude lurking behind me. But then the weather started to take a turn. The sky, which had been a clear blue just moments ago, was now filled with dark, ominous clouds. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees and sending leaves swirling through the air. And in the distance, I could hear a low rumble of thunder. "Great," I muttered to myself. "Just what I need." I glanced back at Frank. He was staring up at the sky, a strange expression on his face. It wasn't fear, exactly. More like anticipation. "Looks like a storm's brewing," I said, trying to sound casual. "Indeed," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. I noticed that the creek, which had been a gentle stream just a while ago, was now flowing much faster, the water churning and muddy. I'd read about flash floods in this area. They could happen quickly, with little warning, turning a peaceful creek into a raging torrent in a matter of minutes. "We should probably find some higher ground," I said, my voice a bit tighter now. Frank just shrugged. "The storm will pass." "Yeah, but..." I started to say, but then I stopped. What was the point? This guy clearly wasn't worried. Maybe he knew something I didn't. Or maybe he was just crazy. I decided to trust my gut. I scrambled up the bank, away from the rising water, and found a spot under a large overhang. It wasn't ideal, but it would offer some protection if the storm hit. "You coming?" I called out to Frank. He was still standing by the creek, staring at the swirling water. "I'll be fine," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave him there, but another part of me, the part that still believed in basic human decency, couldn't just abandon him. "Look," I said, "I don't know about you, but I'd rather not get swept away by a flash flood. So unless you've got gills, I suggest you get your ass up here." He finally turned to look at me, a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it amusement? Contempt? I couldn't tell. "Very well," he said, and slowly made his way up the bank. As he approached, I noticed something in his hand, a long, thin object glinting in the fading light. It looked like a knife. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing through the canyon with a vengeance. The creek, which had been rising steadily, was now a raging torrent, brown and frothy, carrying branches and debris downstream. The thunder boomed, each clap closer than the last, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the canyon in a blinding flash. "We need to get higher," I yelled over the roar of the water. Frank just stood there, that damn knife still clutched in his hand, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "It's too late," he said, his voice barely audible. I didn't need any more convincing. I scrambled further up the slope, searching for a safe haven. The rain was coming down in sheets now, making the rocks slippery and treacherous. I slipped and slid, my heart pounding in my chest, the fear of being swept away by the flood fueling my desperate climb. Suddenly, a wall of water surged through the canyon, a monstrous wave that seemed to rise out of nowhere. I heard Frank scream, a high-pitched, desperate sound that was quickly swallowed by the roar of the flood. I clung to a rock, my fingers digging into the crevices as the water surged around me, threatening to tear me away. The wave receded, leaving behind a scene of chaos. Trees were uprooted, rocks were strewn across the path, and the creek was a churning mass of debris. I looked around for Frank, but he was gone. Had he been swept away, or had he managed to find higher ground? I didn't have time to dwell on it. I needed to get to safety, and fast. The storm was still raging, and another flash flood could hit at any moment. I climbed higher, scrambling over rocks and fallen trees, my clothes soaked, my body shivering. Finally, I reached a ledge, a small, precarious platform overlooking the canyon. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I collapsed on the ledge, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. As I lay there, catching my breath, I realized something. My backpack was gone. It must have been ripped away during the flood. All my supplies, my food, my water, my first aid kit were gone. I was stranded, injured, and alone. And somewhere out there, in the storm-ravaged canyon, was a crazy old man with a knife. The storm raged on, the wind and rain battering the ledge where I lay. I was soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably, my teeth chattering like a jackhammer. My left ankle throbbed with pain, probably sprained during the fall. I tried to move it, but a sharp jolt of pain shot up my leg. "Great," I muttered. "Just great." I looked around, trying to assess my situation. The ledge was narrow, barely wide enough to lie down on. The rock face above was sheer, with no obvious handholds. Below, the canyon floor was a churning mess of floodwater and debris. I was trapped. The darkness was closing in, the storm clouds blocking out what little remained of the daylight. I knew I needed to find shelter, and fast. Hypothermia was a real threat, and I didn't want to freeze to death on this goddamn ledge. I scanned the cliff face, searching for a cave or an overhang. Just when I was about to give up hope, I spotted a small opening, partially hidden by a tangle of vines. It looked like a tight squeeze, but it might offer some protection from the elements. I crawled towards the opening, wincing with each movement of my ankle. The vines tore at my clothes and skin, but I pushed through, desperate to reach the shelter. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for me to fit through, but I managed to wriggle inside. The cave was small, damp, and smelled of earth and moss, but it was dry, and it offered some respite from the wind and rain. I collapsed on the floor, my body shaking with cold and exhaustion. As I lay there, catching my breath, I realized something. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. Frank was gone. Maybe he was swept away. Maybe he found higher ground. I didn't know, and at that moment, I didn't care. All I cared about was survival. I needed to find a way out of this canyon, a way to get back to civilization. But with a sprained ankle, no supplies, and a storm raging outside, my chances seemed slim. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the fear and despair. But one thought kept creeping back into my mind. What if Frank wasn't gone? What if he was out there, somewhere in the darkness, watching me? waiting. The storm finally started to die down. The rain subsided to a drizzle, and the wind no longer howled like a tormented spirit. A sliver of pale light crept through the cave entrance, signaling the break of dawn. I hadn't slept a wink. Every creak and groan of the cave, every rustle of leaves outside, sent my heart racing. Frank's face, twisted in a menacing grin, kept flashing before my eyes. I knew I couldn't stay in the cave forever. I had to find a way out of this canyon, and I had to do it soon. My ankle was still throbbing, but I figured I could manage to hobble along. Besides, staying put wasn't an option. The thought of Frank lurking out there, maybe tracking me, was enough to get me moving. I cautiously emerged from the cave, wincing as I put weight on my injured ankle. The canyon looked like a war zone. Trees were snapped in half, boulders were scattered everywhere, and the creek was still a raging torrent. Though the water level had receded somewhat, I started to make my way down the slope, using rocks and tree roots for support. The going was slow and painful, but I was determined to put as much distance between myself and that cave as possible. As I limped along, I noticed something strange. There were footprints in the mud, fresh footprints, leading away from the creek and up the opposite slope. They weren't my footprints. They were larger, heavier, and they had a distinctive pattern. I recognized the pattern from the boots Frank had been wearing. My heart sank. He was still alive, and he was out there, somewhere. I followed the footprints, a growing sense of dread creeping over me. They led to a small clearing, where I found the remains of a campfire. The ashes were still warm, and there were scraps of food scattered around, empty energy bar wrappers, a crumpled bag of trail mix. Frank had been here recently, but that wasn't the worst of it. Next to the campfire, I found something else, a blood-stained rock, the crimson stain still fresh. And next to the rock, a piece of fabric, ripped and torn, that looked like it had been ripped from a shirt. A shirt like the one Frank had been wearing. My blood ran cold. Had Frank been injured? Or had he hurt someone else? I didn't want to think about it. I turned and ran, ignoring the pain in my ankle, the fear propelling me forward. I had to get out of this canyon. I had to get away from Frank. But where could I go? I was lost, injured, and alone. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of the canyon, a madman was on the loose. I didn't stop running until I reached a massive boulder, its surface slick with rain. I crouched behind it, gasping for breath, my lungs burning, my ankles screaming in protest. I peeked around the boulder, scanning the canyon for any sign of Frank. Nothing. But that didn't mean he wasn't out there. He could be anywhere, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to keep moving, find a place to hide, a place where Frank couldn't find me. But where? The canyon walls were steep, the terrain treacherous. There was nowhere to go. Then I saw it, a narrow crevice in the rock face, almost completely hidden by a curtain of vines. It looked like a tight squeeze, but it might offer some concealment. I crawled towards it, my heart pounding in my chest, praying that Frank hadn't seen me. I squeezed through the crevice, scraping my skin on the rough rock. the vines snagging on my clothes. The passage was narrow, dark, and damp, but I pushed forward, driven by fear. Finally, I emerged into a small, hidden grotto. It was a small, circular space, with a pool of water in the center and a few stunted trees growing along the walls. Sunlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, casting an eerie glow on the mossy rocks. It was a strange, almost magical place, a hidden oasis in the heart of the canyon. I sank to the ground, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. I had found a sanctuary, a place where Frank couldn't reach me, at least for now. But as I sat there, catching my breath, I noticed something. There were footprints in the soft earth around the pool. Footprints that weren't mine. They were the same distinctive pattern as the ones I had seen earlier. Frank's footprints. He had been here. He had found this place. And he knew I was here. A wave of panic washed over me. I scrambled to my feet, searching for an escape route, but there was none. The grotto was a dead end. Then I heard it, a sound, faint but unmistakable, the sound of footsteps approaching. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Frank was coming. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. The footsteps grew louder, closer. He was just outside the grotto now. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. But then the footsteps stopped. Silence. I held my breath, listening intently. Nothing. Had he gone, or was he just waiting, toying with me? Then I heard it again, a soft, guttural sound, like a cough. It came from the entrance to the grotto. He was there. He was watching me. I opened my eyes, slowly, fearfully, and there he was, standing in the entrance, silhouetted against the light. His face was hidden in shadow, but I could see the glint of the knife in his hand. He smiled, a slow, cruel smile. "Found you," he whispered. The sight of Frank, standing there with that chilling smile, sent a surge of adrenaline through me. Fight or flight kicked in, and for a split second, I considered bolting past him, making a desperate run for it. But I knew it was futile. He was faster, stronger, and he had a weapon. "What do you want?" I croaked, my voice trembling. He chuckled, a low guttural sound that echoed through the grotto. "What do you think I want?" he said, taking a step closer. "I want what you have." "I don't have anything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I lost my backpack in the flood." He raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. "Oh, I know you lost your backpack," he said, "but you still have something I need." He took another step closer, and I could see the madness in his eyes. He was clearly delusional, probably a survivalist who had spent too long in the wilderness, his mind warped by isolation and paranoia. "What are you talking about?" I said, trying to keep him talking, to buy myself some time. "Your life," he said simply. "Your life force, your energy." Okay, now he was just plain crazy. I glanced around the grotto, desperately searching for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. But there was nothing, just smooth rock walls and a pool of water. Frank lunged at me, the knife flashing in the dim light. I instinctively raised my arms to protect myself, and the knife sliced through my forearm, a searing pain shooting through my body. I cried out, stumbling backward, my blood splattering on the mossy rocks. He lunged again, and I managed to dodge, the knife grazing my ribs. I kicked out, catching him in the shin, and he stumbled back, cursing. I saw my chance. I charged at him, head down, like a bull. I slammed into him, knocking him off balance. We both went down, crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. I wrestled with him, trying to get the knife away from him, but he was strong, surprisingly strong for an old man. He punched me in the face, the blow sending stars exploding in my vision. I tasted blood, my own blood, warm and metallic. He raised the knife again, aiming for my chest. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a gasp, a choked sound. I opened my eyes and saw Frank staring down at his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. My eyes followed his gaze, and I saw it. A sharp, jagged rock protruding from the ground, right where he had fallen. He had impaled himself on it. He looked at me, his face contorted in pain and rage. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a gurgling sound emerged. Then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he slumped to the ground, dead. I lay there, next to his lifeless body, my body shaking, my mind reeling. I had survived. I had actually survived. But at what cost? I was injured, exhausted, and alone, and I still had to find a way out of this canyon. I stumbled out of the grotto, the image of Frank's lifeless body seared into my brain. The rain had stopped, and a weak sun was trying to break through the clouds. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, exhaustion, and a lingering sense of horror. I had survived, but at what cost? My ankle was throbbing, my forearm was bleeding, and my whole body ached. I needed to get out of this canyon, and I needed to get help. But first, I had to deal with Frank's body. I couldn't just leave him there. I went back into the grotto, steeling myself for the sight that awaited me. Frank lay sprawled on the ground, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The knife still clutched in his hand. The blood had pooled around him, staining the mossy rocks a dark crimson. I knelt beside him, my stomach churning. I gently pried the knife from his grasp, the cold metal sending a shiver down my spine. I then searched his pockets, hoping to find something useful. A map, a compass, anything that could help me get out of this mess. All I found was a battered wallet, a few crumpled dollar bills, and a small tarnished locket. I opened the locket, and inside was a faded photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. I wondered who she was, his daughter, his wife. A pang of sadness hit me. This man, this madman, had once been someone's loved one. I closed the locket and tucked it back into his pocket. I then dragged his body out of the grotto, the task made more difficult by my injured ankle. I found a secluded spot under a large tree and covered him with leaves and branches, a makeshift burial in this desolate place. I stood there for a moment, paying my respects to this troubled soul. Then I turned and walked away, determined to find my way out of this nightmare. I followed the creek downstream, hoping it would lead me out of the canyon. The going was slow and painful, but I pushed myself forward, fueled by a desperate hope. As the sun began to set, I came across a narrow path leading up the canyon wall. It was steep and treacherous, but it offered a glimmer of hope. I started to climb, my body screaming in protest, my vision blurring with exhaustion. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I reached the top. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I had made it. I was out of the canyon. I looked back at the rugged landscape, the setting sun casting long shadows across the deep ravines. A shiver ran down my spine. I would never forget this place of fear and death, but I had survived, and that was all that mattered. A park ranger found me the next morning, stumbling along a dirt road a few miles from the canyon. I was in pretty bad shape, dehydrated, delirious, and covered in cuts and bruises. They took me to the nearest hospital, where I spent the next few days recovering. The physical wounds healed, but the mental scars remained. I couldn't shake the memories of those days in the canyon, the fear, the desperation, the violence. I had nightmares, flashbacks, panic attacks. I couldn't be alone, couldn't go near any wooded areas, couldn't even look at a knife without feeling a surge of terror. The police investigated Frank's death, of course. They found his body where I had left it, and they identified him through his fingerprints. He was a drifter, a loner with a history of mental instability. They never found out why he attacked me, what he meant by life force and energy. Maybe he was just crazy. Maybe he was something more sinister. I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't want to know. I tried to move on, to put the whole experience behind me. I went back to college, tried to focus on my studies, tried to reconnect with my friends, but it wasn't easy. The fear was always there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. One night, a few months after the incident, I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard a noise. A soft scratching sound, like someone was dragging something across the floor outside my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate. I got out of bed, my legs trembling, and crept towards the window. I peeked through the blinds, and my blood ran cold. There, in the dim light of the street lamp, was a figure. A tall, gaunt figure, with a scraggly beard and a weathered face. He was wearing a faded flannel shirt and cargo pants, and he was dragging something behind him, something that looked like a backpack. My backpack. He looked up, and our eyes met. He smiled, a slow, cruel smile. And then he spoke, his voice a low, guttural whisper that sent chills down my spine. "I told you," he said. "The woods have a way of revealing things." And then he was gone, vanished into the darkness, leaving me standing there, paralyzed with fear, the scratching sound echoing in my ears. I never saw him again, but I know he's out there, somewhere, waiting. The crisp autumn air whipped through my hair as I wrestled with the tent poles, the canvas flapping in the wind like a startled bird. Whoa there, easy tiger, I chuckled, glancing at my son Ethan, who was busy collecting firewood, his small figure a blur of activity against the backdrop of towering pines. He grinned, his cheeks flushed with excitement. Dad, look! I found the perfect branch for roasting marshmallows. That's my boy, I said, ruffling his hair. Always the eagle eye. We had finally arrived at our campsite after a long drive. It was nestled deep within the heart of Blackwood Forest, a place I used to visit with my own father when I was a kid. It was a secluded spot, miles away from civilization, offering the peace and tranquility I desperately craved. As I hammered the last stake into the ground, a shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched, an unsettling sensation that prickled my skin. I glanced around, but there was nothing but the dense woods and the imposing silhouette of the mountains in the distance. Dad, can we go explore the creek now? Ethan asked, his eyes sparkling with adventure. I hesitated, the uneasy feeling lingering. Sure, buddy, I said, forcing a smile. But let's stick close, okay? We ventured into the woods, the ground soft beneath our feet, a carpet of fallen leaves muffling our footsteps. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, a familiar aroma that brought back a flood of childhood memories. But as we delved deeper into the forest, the light began to fade, the towering trees casting long, ominous shadows. The once peaceful woods now seemed to whisper secrets in the wind, their rustling leaves sounding like hushed warnings. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. Something wasn't right. This place, once a haven of fond memories, now felt alien and threatening. We reached the creek, its water gurgling over the rocks, a soothing sound that did little to calm my nerves. Ethan, oblivious to my growing apprehension, was already skipping rocks across the surface, his laughter echoing through the trees. As I watched him, I noticed a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there, just the dense undergrowth and the deepening shadows. Ethan, I called out, my voice tight with anxiety. Time to head back. He looked up, his face etched with disappointment. Already, Dad? It's getting late, I said, trying to sound casual. We need to set up camp before it gets dark. We retraced our steps, the forest growing darker with every passing minute. The once welcoming woods now seemed to press in on us, their silence broken only by the crunch of leaves under our feet. As we neared our campsite, I noticed something strange. The tent flap was open, swaying gently in the breeze. I had been sure I had zipped it closed before we left. A wave of panic washed over me. I quickened my pace, my hand instinctively reaching for the pocket knife I always carried. Ethan, stay close, I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. We approached the tent cautiously, my eyes scanning the surroundings. There was no sign of any disturbance, yet the open tent flap was an undeniable indication that something was amiss. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The tent was empty. Ethan's sleeping bag lay untouched. Ethan? I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer. only the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat of fear echoing in my ears. Where was Ethan? What had happened while we were gone? I rushed out of the tent, my eyes frantically searching the surrounding woods. "Ethan!" I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. Silence. Then, a faint sound reached my ears, a whimper coming from the depths of the forest. I hesitated for a moment, fear battling with the primal urge to protect my son. But there was no choice. I had to find him. With my knife clutched tightly in my hand, I plunged into the darkness, following the sound of Ethan's cries. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the whimpers grew louder, leading me towards the unknown. The feeling of being watched intensified, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I emerged into a small clearing, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on the scene before me. There, in the center of the clearing, was Ethan, huddled on the ground, his face buried in his hands. "Ethan!" I cried out, rushing towards him. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror. "Dad!" he sobbed, clinging to me. "It's okay, I'm here," I said, holding him close, my heart aching at the sight of his fear. "Dad, I saw something," he whispered, his voice trembling. "In the woods." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did you see, son?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously. "It was tall and dark," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "with red eyes." My blood ran cold. The feeling of dread that had been gnawing at me all day intensified. We were not alone in these woods. "Come on, Ethan," I said, my voice firm despite the fear gripping my insides. "Let's get out of here." I scooped him up in my arms and turned to leave the clearing, but as I did, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. A tall, gaunt figure, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The creature stepped out of the shadows, its form becoming clearer in the moonlight. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, a nightmare come to life. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over its bones, its limbs long and spindly. Its face was a grotesque mask of sharp angles and hollow eyes, its mouth a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the primal instinct to protect my son overriding my fear. I turned and ran, clutching Ethan tightly in my arms. The creature let out a guttural roar, the sound echoing through the forest, sending shivers down my spine. I could hear its heavy footsteps pounding behind me, gaining ground with every stride. I stumbled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The creature was closing in. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, its rancid smell filling my nostrils. I glanced back over my shoulder and saw its outstretched claws reaching for me. I dodged just in time, the creature's claws grazing my arm. I cried out in pain, but I didn't slow down. I had to reach the campsite. To safety, the tent came into view, a beacon of hope in the darkness. I burst through the flap, collapsing onto the ground, Ethan still clutched in my arms. I scrambled to my feet, frantically searching for the zipper. My fingers fumbled with the flimsy material, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I managed to close the tent, sealing us inside. I leaned against the canvas, gasping for breath, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. We were safe, for now. The tent was suffocatingly silent. Ethan was clinging to me, his little body trembling like a leaf. I could feel the frantic thump of his heart against my chest, mirroring my own. I tried to calm him down, whispering soothing words, but my voice shook with a tremor I couldn't control. "Dad," Ethan whimpered, his voice barely audible. "What was that thing?" "I don't know, buddy," I admitted, my throat tight. "But we're safe now. We're safe." I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. The image of the creature, its skeletal frame and those glowing red eyes, was burned into my mind. It felt like an eternity that we sat there, huddled together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest outside, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a fresh wave of fear washing over me. I knew we couldn't stay in the tent forever. We needed to get out of there, find help. But the thought of venturing back into those woods, with that thing lurking out there, it was paralyzing. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam of light cutting through the darkness, momentarily blinding me. Ethan flinched, his grip tightening on my arm. "It's okay, Ethan," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "It's just the flashlight." I shone the light around the tent, checking for any signs of the creature. The canvas walls seemed flimsy, offering little protection against those razor-sharp claws. I felt a surge of helplessness. We were trapped, like mice in a cage, waiting for the predator to strike. "Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with fear. "I'm scared." "I know, buddy," I said, pulling him closer. "I am too." I wished I could tell him everything would be all right, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if we would make it out of this alive. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the silence, followed by a series of heavy thuds. Ethan buried his face in my chest, his body shaking with sobs. I held him tight, my heart pounding in my ears. The sounds were coming from outside, close to the tent. It felt like something was circling us, pacing back and forth, like a predator sizing up its prey. I could hear its heavy breathing, its low growl, sending shivers down my spine. I gripped the pocket knife in my hand, the cold steel offering a small sense of comfort. I knew it was no match for the creature, but it was all I had. The pacing continued for what felt like an eternity, the creature's growls growing louder, more menacing. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with anticipation. I held my breath, straining my ears for any sound. Nothing. Had it gone, or was it just waiting for the right moment to strike? Then, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. It was Ethan. I looked down and saw him pointing towards the tent flap, his eyes wide with terror. I followed his gaze, and my blood ran cold. The tent flap was slowly being pulled open, revealing a glimpse of the creature's grotesque face. its glowing red eyes bored into mine, filled with malice and hunger. I knew then that we were no longer safe. The hunt was on. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The creature's face, a grotesque mask of bone and sinew, filled the opening of the tent flap. Its glowing red eyes locked onto mine, and a wave of primal fear washed over me. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my body instinctively preparing for a fight. I knew I couldn't win. "Ethan," I hissed, shoving him behind me. "Get to the back of the tent, now." He scrambled back, his eyes wide with terror. I fumbled for my pocket knife, the cold steel a meager comfort against the monstrous creature before me. The creature let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated through the thin fabric of the tent. It lunged forward, its claws tearing through the canvas like paper. I screamed, lunging forward with the knife, a desperate attempt to defend myself. The blade connected with something solid, and the creature recoiled with a hiss of pain. I had managed to slash its arm, but the wound seemed to close almost instantly. It snarled, its rage palpable. It lunged again, and I barely managed to dodge its claws. The tent was in chaos, the canvas ripping and tearing as the creature thrashed around. I knew we couldn't stay here. We had to escape. "Ethan," I yelled. "Run." He hesitated for a moment, frozen in fear. I grabbed his arm and pulled him towards the back of the tent, where the creature hadn't yet reached. We scrambled out, tumbling onto the forest floor. The creature roared in frustration, its claws tearing through the remaining fabric of the tent. We were exposed, vulnerable. I pulled Ethan to his feet, and we ran blindly into the darkness. The creature was close behind, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth. We could hear its enraged growls, its hot breath on our necks. We stumbled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes. I could hear Ethan sobbing behind me, his small legs struggling to keep up. "We have to keep going, Ethan," I gasped, my lungs burning. "We can't stop." We burst out of the trees and into a small clearing. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the scene before us. There, in the center of the clearing, stood an old abandoned cabin. It was our only hope. "Ethan, the cabin!" I yelled, pointing towards the dilapidated structure. We ran towards it, our feet pounding the soft earth. The creature was still in pursuit, its roars echoing through the night. We reached the cabin, and I slammed the door shut, barricading it with a fallen log. We collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, our bodies shaking with fear and exhaustion. We were safe, for now, but I knew the creature wouldn't give up easily. It would be back. The cabin was small, just one room, with rough-hewn wooden walls and a dirt floor. Moonlight streamed through the gaps in the boarded-up windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and a chill hung in the air, despite the warmth of the summer night. Ethan was huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with fear, his body trembling. I knelt beside him, pulling him into a hug. "It's okay, Ethan," I whispered, trying to soothe him. "We're safe now." But even as I said the words, I didn't believe them. We were far from safe. The creature was out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for us to make a mistake. I could hear it pacing around the cabin, its heavy footsteps crunching on the dry leaves outside. It was testing the walls, searching for a way in. The flimsy wooden door wouldn't hold it for long. I scanned the room, desperately searching for something, anything, that could be used as a weapon. There was a rusty old axe leaning against the wall, but it was too heavy for me to wield effectively. Besides, I didn't want to risk making too much noise and attracting the creature's attention. Suddenly, Ethan let out a gasp. "Dad, look," he whispered, pointing towards the far corner of the room. I followed his gaze and my heart sank. There, in the shadows, was a small hole in the wall, just big enough for the creature to squeeze through. I felt a surge of panic. We were trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The creature let out a low growl, and I knew it had found us. It began to claw at the hole, its sharp talons tearing through the wood. I could hear the splintering of wood as it widened the opening. I grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him towards the opposite corner of the room. We huddled together, our backs pressed against the wall, waiting for the inevitable. The creature's head emerged through the hole, its glowing red eyes scanning the room. It let out a triumphant roar, and I knew our time was up. The creature squeezed through the hole, its bony frame contorting in a way that shouldn't have been possible. It unfolded itself in the cramped cabin, its head almost brushing the ceiling. The stench of rot and decay filled the air, making me gag. Ethan was sobbing uncontrollably now, his tiny body shaking with fear. I wanted to tell him it was going to be okay, but the lie caught in my throat. The creature lunged at us, its claws outstretched. I shoved Ethan behind me, raising the axe in a desperate attempt to defend us. The axe connected with the creature's arm, a sickening thud echoing through the cabin. It howled in pain, stumbling back. I hadn't expected to actually hurt it, and the surprise gave me a surge of adrenaline. But the creature was quick to recover. It snarled, its red eyes burning with rage. It lunged again, and this time, I wasn't fast enough. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my shirt and leaving deep gashes in my skin. I cried out in pain, stumbling back. Ethan screamed, "Dad!" I saw a flash of movement, and then Ethan was between me and the creature. He had picked up a rock, no bigger than his fist, and hurled it at the creature's face. It hit the creature square in the eye, and it roared in fury. "Run, Ethan!" I yelled, scrambling to my feet. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then turned and ran towards the door. The creature lunged after him, but I tackled it, bringing it crashing to the ground. We wrestled, the creature's strength far greater than mine. I felt its claws tearing at my flesh, its teeth grazing my neck, but I held on, fueled by a desperate need to protect my son. I kicked and punched and scratched, anything to keep the creature away from Ethan. Ethan had managed to get the door open. "Dad, come on," he yelled. I saw my chance. I shoved the creature away from me, scrambling to my feet. I sprinted towards the door, the creature hot on my heels. We burst out of the cabin and into the night. The creature was right behind us, its roars echoing through the forest. We scrambled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes. The creature was right behind us, its ragged breathing hot on our necks. I could hear the pounding of its feet on the soft earth, getting closer with every stride. Ethan was crying, his little legs pumping furiously. "Dad, I can't run anymore." "You have to, Ethan," I yelled back, my voice hoarse. "We can't stop now." I glanced over my shoulder and saw the creature gaining on us. Its eyes glowed like burning coals in the darkness, its claws outstretched like talons. Fear lent me a burst of speed I didn't know I had. I grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him along with me. We stumbled through the trees, the forest a blur of shadows and moonlight. I didn't know where we were going, just that we had to get as far away from the cabin as possible. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath my feet, and I tumbled down a steep embankment. I landed with a thud, the wind knocked out of me. Ethan cried out as he fell on top of me. "Ethan, are you okay?" I gasped, struggling to sit up. "I think so," he whimpered, his voice shaky. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. We were at the bottom of a ravine, the walls rising steeply on either side. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick canopy of trees overhead, plunging us into near darkness. And then I heard it, the creature's roar echoing down the ravine. It had followed us. I scrambled to my feet, pulling Ethan up with me. "We have to keep going," I said, my voice trembling. "There has to be a way out of here." We stumbled along the bottom of the ravine, the ground uneven and treacherous. The creature was above us now, its growls echoing down the walls. I could hear it moving, crashing through the undergrowth, searching for us. We were trapped, like rats, in a maze, and the cat was closing in. The ravine seemed to stretch on forever. We scrambled over rocks and fallen trees, the rough terrain tearing at our clothes and skin. I could hear the creature above us, its growls echoing down the walls of the ravine, a terrifying soundtrack to our desperate flight. Ethan was starting to flag, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. "Dad, I can't, go on." I scooped him up into my arms, ignoring the searing pain in my chest and the burning in my legs. "I've got you, buddy," I said, my voice strained. "Just hold on tight." The ground leveled out, and we stumbled out of the ravine and into a dense thicket of trees. The moonlight was swallowed up by the thick canopy of leaves overhead, leaving us in almost total darkness. I could barely see a foot in front of me. We had to find somewhere to hide, and fast. The creature was still on our trail. I could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind us. Suddenly I saw a faint light ahead, a small, flickering flame, like a candle in the window. Hope surged through me. Could it be a house, a cabin, anything with walls and a door that we could barricade? I pushed through the trees, my heart pounding with renewed hope. And then I saw it. An old, abandoned church. Its steeple was crooked, and the windows were boarded up, but it was still standing. The light was coming from a single candle burning on the altar inside. "Ethan," I whispered. "Look." He looked up, his eyes widening. "A church?" "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse. Maybe we can find shelter there. We stumbled towards the church, our legs aching, our lungs burning. The creature's roars were getting closer. We had to reach the church before it caught us. I fumbled with the old, rusty door handle, and it creaked open. We slipped inside, the door slamming shut behind us. I leaned against the heavy wood, gasping for breath. We were safe. For now, the church was deathly silent. The only sound was our ragged breathing and the pounding of our hearts. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and a chill hung in the air despite the warmth of the summer night. Ethan was clinging to me, his small body trembling. "Dad, I'm scared," he whispered. "I know, buddy," I said, my voice hoarse. "But we're safe now. We're safe." I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. The creature was out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for us to make a mistake. I pulled Ethan closer, trying to shield him with my body. I scanned the church, looking for anything that could be used as a weapon. There was nothing but old, rotting pews and a crumbling altar. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the church. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. Ethan screamed, burying his face in my chest. The bang came again, louder this time. It sounded like something was trying to break down the door. I felt a surge of panic. We were trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The banging continued, each blow shaking the old church to its foundations. I could hear the wood splintering, the hinges groaning. It wouldn't be long before the creature broke through. I looked around desperately, searching for a way out. There was a small window behind the altar, but it was boarded up. I grabbed a loose piece of wood from a nearby pew and started to pry the boards loose. The banging on the door grew louder, more insistent. I could hear the creature snarling, its hot breath seeping through the cracks in the wood. I worked frantically, my fingers tearing at the old nails. The boards finally gave way, and I tossed them aside. The window was small, but it was big enough for Ethan to squeeze through. "Ethan, go!" I yelled, pushing him towards the window. "Get out of here!" He hesitated for a moment, his eyes wide with fear. "But what about you, Dad? I'll be right behind you," I said, my voice strained. "Just go." He climbed through the window, disappearing into the darkness outside. I turned back to the door. Just as the creature broke through, the creature burst through the door, a whirlwind of claws and teeth. I barely had time to register its grotesque form before it was upon me. I threw myself to the side, narrowly avoiding its grasp. It slammed into the wall, the impact shaking the whole church. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had to get out of there, find Ethan. But the creature was blocking the door, its glowing red eyes fixed on me. I lunged forward, a desperate attempt to distract it. It snarled, swiping at me with its claws. I ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding its attacks. I could feel its hot breath on my face, its putrid stench filling my nostrils. I saw my chance. The creature lunged again, and I dove between its legs. I scrambled out the door, into the cool night air. I could hear the creature roaring behind me. its footsteps pounding the ground. I didn't look back, just ran. I ran as fast as I could, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I burst out of the trees and into the clearing where we had camped. The tent was still there, ripped and torn, a testament to the terror we had endured. "Ethan," I yelled, my voice hoarse. "Ethan, where are you?" There was no answer. I searched frantically, my heart pounding in my chest. Where was he? Had the creature caught him? And then I saw him. He was huddled behind a tree, his small body shaking with fear. "Ethan!" I cried, rushing towards him. He looked up, his eyes wide with relief. "Dad!" I scooped him up in my arms, holding him close. We were safe. We were finally safe. We left the campsite immediately, not stopping until we reached the highway. We flagged down a passing truck driver who took us to the nearest town. We never went back to Blackwood Forest. The memory of that night still haunts me. I can still see the creature's glowing red eyes, hear its terrifying roar. I can still feel its claws tearing at my flesh. I will never take my son camping again. The police, of course, didn't believe us. A wild animal attack, they called it. Maybe a bear or a cougar. They looked at me with pity in their eyes, like I was some grieving father who'd lost his mind to grief and trauma. I didn't bother correcting them. What was the point? Who would believe that a creature straight out of a nightmare had hunted us through the woods? We went back home, to our quiet suburban life. But things were different. The world felt off. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden danger. Every creak in the house sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't sleep. When I did manage to drift off, the nightmares came, vivid, terrifying nightmares of glowing red eyes and razor-sharp claws. Ethan was different too. He used to be such a happy, carefree kid. Now, he was quiet and withdrawn. He wouldn't go anywhere near the woods, wouldn't even play in the backyard after dark. The sparkle in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dullness that broke my heart. I tried to be strong for him, to be the father he needed. But the truth was, I was just as scared as he was. The fear had burrowed deep inside me, a constant companion that whispered doubts and anxieties in my ear. We went to therapy, both of us. It helped a little, but the scars remained. Invisible scars that ran deep, a constant reminder of the night we were hunted in Blackwood Forest. I still jump at every sudden noise, still feel a chill when I see a dark shape in the shadows. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that I will never be truly free from the fear. The creature may be gone, but its memory lives on. A constant reminder that there are things in this world that we don't understand, things that go bump in the night, things that hunt in the darkness,